this is our OASIS Plus Phase 2 deep dive. So we are going to get through as much as we can in the hour that we have together here. Really want to give you an overview today of what's happening with this contract, kind of where we're at, review the contract structure, the new domains, talk a little bit about Phase 1 and Phase 2, walk you through the self-scoring process, and probably what most people are interested in are the areas to watch, right? These are the things that are going to get you in trouble and that might change when we see Amendment 8 come out, because, you know, obviously we had all the submissions finished in, I think it was, 2024 at this point, 2023, 2024, it blurs, and they've been doing rolling awards. So the last actual solicitation that we saw was Amendment 7, and we'll get into the nuances of that, but that's kind of our starting point for this. We'll walk through some next steps too at the end, so you know what you can do before January 12th. Okay, some very quick introductions. So if you've not worked with Trident, welcome. We are a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business that is comprised mostly of military spouses and military veterans, although we have a couple rock stars who don't fit that exact demographic. They're still wonderful. But it's one of our unique things about Trident is that we all kind of have this service-oriented background. And it comes through in our core values, right? If you've ever worked with us, hopefully you've observed some of these things in the way that we interact with our clients. So our military-level professionalism, we have teamwork front and center, keeping client-centric excellence front of mind, owning the outcome, right? Being accountable and responsible if you're working with us, and then just encouraging this idea of thriving, right? So doing what you need to in life to show up as your best self. So again, I thank you all for taking time during what is probably a very busy holiday week to come and get a little bit smarter on OASIS Plus. We're here with you. We're ready for this to kick off and to go. So without further ado, I am Rebecca Wayland. I'm the Chief of Staff at Trident. I'm also our GWAC lead. So if you've tuned in for Polaris or OASIS Plus or NASA Soup, you've probably seen me alongside some of my fantastic colleagues. But this is one of my core responsibilities at Trident, is to just track these multiple award IDIQs and try to get as many people on ramp to them as we can when it makes sense for their business development goals. We'll talk about that later. A little bit about me. I am a Navy veteran. I'm also a Navy spouse, 2006 graduate of the United States Naval Academy. But really what I'm most proud of on here is that I sing baritone with Honolulu Blend. So we're actually Christmas caroling tonight. So we're just packing the season full of all kinds of interesting activities. But shout out to all the singers if you're there. I'm actually a trumpet player by trade, but in my adult life with kids, it's just easier to sing now. Okay, what you all came for? OASIS Plus overview. Here's where we are at. So if you're not familiar, if you're brand new to this, or even if you just need a little refresher, as a reminder, the way that OASIS Plus is structured is there's 6 separate IDIQs. There's an unrestricted IDIQ, which is kind of for the large business, although not exclusively. There are small businesses on that unrestricted IDIQ. There's a small business IDIQ, a woman-owned small business IDIQ, a service-disabled veteran-owned small business IDIQ, Hub Zone IDIQ, and 8A IDIQ. And this is important because as we go through and we're talking about project alignment and how your contract gets awarded, there are some restrictions in terms of what you can do with project documentation. And so the competition is kind of categorized based on set-aside type and size. There is no contract ceiling for OASIS Plus, which is one of the things that makes it really appealing for both federal agencies and contract holders, because we're not going to get capped. Whatever business we can do on this contract that falls within the scope is permitted. The other thing that's really favored, I think, by a lot of people with OASIS Plus is that it is a scorecard evaluation, and the points or the credits come from a combination of project and corporate level criteria. So a lot of the scorecard is based on past experience. What's really nice about this is there is a minimum qualifying threshold that is published and used. And so it's kind of like walking into a final in a college course and finding out that it's an open book test. Like, we have the answers, we know what they're going to grade us on. You know before you submit if you're close to that cutoff or if you're healthily above it. And so the work comes, where the work comes in is in being really detail oriented and meticulous around your substantiating documents. You'll hear me say that over and over. And then other highlights of the contract, they do permit joint ventures to bid, contract teaming arrangements. You can have subcontractors. You can use the work of subcontractors. There's a couple limitations that we'll talk through. But we will be on the lookout for just restrictions around the project contributions from each teammate / duplications of a project. So don't stress about that yet. We'll get into that as we go. Just a real quick timeline to orient you here, right? The initial awards came out last December, so the contract has sort of been live for the better part of the year. We have seen RFIs issued, we've seen task orders issued and awarded. The activity level varies by IDIQ and by domain, but things are happening on OASIS Plus. And then in June, you probably saw our webinar then because GSA had released an RFI saying, hey, we're thinking about adding these domains. What's some feedback that you have? And now in December 2025, we got notice that they are officially moving forward with this. We got a draft score sheet, which is the JP1. We're going to talk about that today. And by all accounts, it sounds like things are going to open up for new proposals to be submitted on January 12th. So how this is going to work, sounds like GSA is planning to release Amendment 8 on or about January 12th. They actually stuck to their timeline pretty well with the draft score sheet. It was supposed to come out on the 16th. I think we got it on the 18th. But importantly, they will be accepting new bids as well as domain enhancements. So a new bid would be if you don't have any IDIQs right now under OASIS Plus and you want to go after the small business, you want to go after the woman-owned small business, you can submit an entire proposal to get your OASIS Plus IDIQ. If you already have an OASIS Plus IDIQ, let's say you have the T&E domain and now you want to add management and advisory, that would be a domain enhancement. That's also something that you're going to be able to submit. And I think we're going to see really detailed instructions in Amendment 8 about which path and what's required based on what you are hoping to achieve with your submission. I also expect that we're going to get some clarification around the springboard. So this would be if you were a small business at the time of your original OASIS Plus IDIQ award, and now you qualify as an SBA certified woman-owned small business. Because that's a separate IDIQ track, there is a process to basically duplicate your proposal and receive the award under that set aside because all the criteria were the same. So we're going to see some guidance, I think, about how to do that. They did confirm in their notice that they are using Symphony as the proposal submission platform, or the online submission platform. Love it or hate it, we're using it. Trident is really familiar with Symphony, so the good news is you've got an on-call advisor you can get in touch with if you run into trouble. And historically, I will give them credit, the Symphony help desk has been pretty helpful. So they're one of those where if you send in your question, their response time is pretty good. And I personally am excited to see that Symphony is being used again because we know there's a learning curve, but it's achievable. And we know how to help you be most efficient when uploading your documents and organizing it. So I'm sure there will be some tweaks or modifications from 2 years ago when we were all going through the upload process. But it's nice to have some continuity because it's probably going to save you a little bit of legwork if you already have an OASIS Plus contract, because all of your company documentation still lives there. So there might be some things that you need to update just based on the time that has elapsed between the last submission and this one. But you shouldn't be starting from scratch if you already submitted something in Symphony before. And then just as a FYI, I want to foot stomp this so that everybody's tracking. If you are a current OASIS Plus contract holder, you should have received mod 908 on the 17th of December. There should be a modification that was sent to you. It's a bilateral modification, so it requires your signature. It should have come out via DocuSign. You need to sign and return that acknowledging this amendment and this expansion no later than January 12th. So even if you're not planning on bidding anything new, even if you're not planning on adding domains, you still need to acknowledge this contract modification. So please don't lose that in the list of holiday to-dos. Make sure you sign your mod, send it in, acknowledge that, yes, you understand that they're changing some terms and that these domains are being added. Okay. Getting into a little bit more of the nuance between phase 1 and phase 2. This is going to be very domain oriented for obvious purposes, or for obvious reasons. So with phase 2, we see the 5 new domains that they teased in the RFI over the summer. These are going to be added, but all of the original 8 domains are still going to be open for bid. So on the left-hand side, you see the original 8 domains. Quick reminder that the enterprise services domain, that only exists on the unrestricted IDIQ. And there's really specific and fairly aggressive or ambitious, I guess, qualification requirements for that. So that really is a category that's set aside for the companies doing large or providing large enterprise services. And we can dig into that probably on a future webinar because we have so much to get through today. But just so that everybody's oriented to the new things that have come out, financial services, human capital services, business administration services, marketing and public relations services, and social services are the 5 new categories. The scoring areas are pretty consistent with what we saw with the last versions up through Amendment 7. I just want to point out a couple things here. In the small business set-asides, the minimum qualification threshold is still 36 out of 50 credits. So you could use any combination of products and certifications to get to that number, but 36 is still kind of the magic number in that domain. Similarly, with unrestricted, it's still 42 out of 50 credits. There are separate scorecards if you're bidding on the unrestricted domain version of something or the small business set-aside version of something. So make sure when you look at the JP1, which is that big Excel file that they put out, you're on the right tab. And then just a quick note that the enterprise services domain, the minimum qualification score for that is 45 credits out of 50. So really limited changes in those scorecards as it relates to the relevance, the scale, the integrated experience area, the management and staffing. Some of the new domains do include personnel certifications and licenses now, and we'll go through those in detail here shortly. Past performance is still a graded area. Federal competition in a multiple award environment, right? If you can show that you have task orders that were awarded at the federal level in a multiple award IDIQ environment, you get some points for those. Having diversity of federal customers is still something that gets you points. Accounting and purchasing systems, that's still a credit area. Facility clearance still a credit, still a credit area. Now my coffee's kicking in. And then the corporate certifications are still things that are being evaluated. A couple significant updates that you may not have noticed. CMMC is now a credit area in certain domains. This is not in every single domain. And I think that was probably by design, but I would also not be totally surprised if when Amendment 8 comes out, if CMMC shows up as a scoring area in the domains not listed here. So for example, it was not in environmental, I think. And I don't know if that was because they just didn't need it as a qualifying credit in that area, or if it was intentionally or unintentionally left off. So we'll keep an eye on that. And then not a surprise if you watched our June webinar, the sustainability related disclosures and certifications, that category has been removed and it's been replaced by a category that's just called other certifications. So both of the things that we thought were going to happen around CMMC being added and the environmental specific things like the greenhouse gas certifications being credit areas, both of those things have come true. So when we get our finalized JP1, we're absolutely going to want to go back through these and check and make sure there haven't been other changes. But this is what it looks like today. I want to cover the definition of a qualifying project real quick, only because this is where we see a lot of folks get derailed early on because they don't understand what they can use as qualifying experience. So again, just as a refresher, there's 5 things that make a qualifying project a qualifying project. The first of that, and by the way, it has to meet all 5 criteria. So it's not, 4 of the 5 or 3 of the 5. All 5 things have to be true. It has to fall into one of these 5 project types, right? So a single contract, a single task order under a federal supply schedule, an OTA is permitted, or a collection of task orders. And if it's a collection of task orders, it has to be on a single award IDIQ. So I just want to make sure we cover that. A little bit of fun trivia for you. The OTA, the other transaction authority, they went back and forth. GSA went back and forth between Amendments 1 and 7. They were permitted, then they weren't permitted. And then by the time we got to Amendment 7, they were at least accepting OTAs as an approved type of project. And I expect that they will continue to do that, but that's just one of those areas where like, will they, won't they? They ended up saying yes. So that should benefit a lot of people. It does have to be a contract or order for services as defined in FAR Part 37. So the most contracts that you have are, but if you're doing like construction services, that's actually that doesn't fall under Part 37. So you just want to make sure whatever project you're considering that it's not something that is excluded from the scope of a project or contract listed here. There will be a minimum average annual value specified, and it's domain specific, and it's based on if you're a large business or a small business. And we'll go through those minimum domain or those minimum thresholds here in a minute. But what's really important to remember is that you're not allowed to annualize the values of those. So GSA puts out a really specific calculation, right, where basically you have to take the number of days, so the period of performance, divided by 366 to account for leap years, and that's how you get your average annual value. And then the asterisk here is if the project is ongoing, you're permitted to claim the entire contract ceiling, so the total contract value, and we can show you where that's at on FPDS if you have any questions, and they usually give you a sample too in the attachments. But if the contract is completed, you're only allowed to take credit for the funds that were actually obligated. So it could be that you were awarded a $25 million contract, but by the time it was all said and done, you only used $14 million of that ceiling. In that case, if the contract is over, you can't use the 25 million, you have to use the 14 million. So it really is important to understand where you're at in the period of performance of the contract so that you do that value calculation correctly. Other things to keep out, so we're on number 4 now. So your project has to be ongoing with at least 6 months of completed performance from the RFP closing date, and we'll have a little asterisk to talk about that too, and completed within 5 years from, they gave us a date here, and this was something that went back and forth on the original versions, like solicitation release, solicitation due date, what are we measuring off of? So I expect to see an update in that in Amendment 8. And there was no minimum period of performance for completed project, because this was something that came up. So what if you had a 4-month project that was $5 million because you're just out there rocking it? Like, you could use that. But you weren't allowed to say, well, had this continued for 12 months, it would have been an even higher value. Like, no. If it's done and over with, you only get to claim what actually happened. And then this 5th part is really important, and I apologize because my text is overlapping my disclosure there at the bottom. But you can't have negative past performance on the project. And this is something where people get a little bit confused, where past performance is a scoring criteria. You only get a point if you were higher than satisfactory, but to use your project as a project at all, it can't have any negative past performance associated with it. So it has to at least be a satisfactory. If there's no rating available, you'll be assigned a neutral, but you still have to like click the box and get the form signed that says, you know, hey, it was neutral, it was satisfactory, it was above that, whatever, just to get it added to your score, basically, so that all of the other points associated with a qualifying project are actually awarded. So that's a little bit of a nuanced user experience thing that's in Symphony to watch out for. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, minimum average value. So this is where everything stands today. No changes with the original 8, right? So if you are looking at bidding in the T&E domain and you're a small business, each project that you use as a qualifying project has to have been at least $500,000 average annual value. It's $500,000 for a lot of the ones in small business. There's a couple exceptions, being environmental and facilities, and research and development. Research and development is actually a higher average annual threshold, and so that's something that people were getting tripped up by. This is going to sound really basic, but on the JP1, where you can find this is at the very top of the spreadsheet. So it has the bold line that's at the top that tells you what domain you're looking at. And then underneath that, it gives you the dollar value for your average annual threshold. A lot of people miss that the last go round because it's easy to miss. But we did have this quick reference chart for you. And I'll just say, you will get the recording from today. You can have the slides, whatever helps you as a quick reference. We're also going to be keeping our blog up to date. So if you're scribbling notes, don't worry about keeping up with that. You can go back to wrapping presents and eating cookies. I won't judge. Try to make it easy for you guys. Okay, so this is one of the things that I'm going to spill the beans a little bit in terms of one of the things that's listed on the areas to watch. I think one of the things that's going to be most tricky about phase 2 is finding the divide between what is management and advisory, what would fall into that domain and be relevant to that kind of service, versus the 5 new added domains. And I say that because on the previous iteration, when we were helping clients bid on OASIS Plus, sometimes they would provide financial services or provide things that didn't the closest thing that they fit was management and advisory. And now there might be a specific domain that really aligns to that. So trying to say, okay, I provide these kinds of services like business process reengineering, for example. How do you know if you're going to align that to management and advisory or business administration? Because that might be something that shows up on both lists. And by the way, all of these bulleted things and all the slides I'm about to show you, these are representative. These are examples. This is not a must be one of these things, but this is an easy way to show relevance to the domain, right? If you can use their language and say, well, you have this categorized in this domain, that's an easier argument to make. It requires less imagination to understand your rationale. So everything I'm about to show you is based on the JP5 from Amendment 7. So we're going to want to look in Amendment 8 and see if they revise any of the domain definitions, right, for lack of a better way to describe these. Something that I will encourage you to do if you're trying to figure out which domain best aligns with the projects that you have, take a look. Don't skip over the introductory sentences before the bulleted list of things. A lot of times people like to jump right to the specific services listed, but it's really important in these to understand what the goal of the domain is. So for example, with management and advisory, it's the full range of management and consulting services that are designed to improve a federal agency's performance, its endeavors to meet mission goals, and provide operating advice and assistance on administrative and management issues. So if as you're looking at this, you zoom out and you say, okay, am I really providing financial services, or am I doing something that's improving the business's performance? Like that might help you decide which track to go with. Okay, so diving in a little bit more, and again, these are just based on what they gave us previously. There may be changes in Amendment 8 when it comes out, but financial services, this is, as you might expect, designed to support financial objectives. So then they have a list of things that might fall under this category. Something I want to highlight is the scorecard excerpt from the JP1 as it relates to financial services. It looks a lot like management and advisory until you get to the management and staffing area. And you can see that you could also be eligible to earn a credit in this area if you are providing services that include 5 or more certified personnel. CGFM or CDFM certified personnel. So just know that that's one point of departure. If you've got these clearances, you might be able to score higher in this domain. And then again, a departure from the management and advisory, at least the original management and advisory scorecard, is that CMMI level 2 or higher is on here, as is CMMC level 2 or higher. We're just highlighting the differences. We're not going line by line. As I said previously, a lot of the scorecard is actually unchanged, right? So a relevant project is still worth the same number of credits across most of the domains. And the financial services, the business administration, all 5 of the new domains look a lot like the management advisory scorecard, with the exception of these things that we're highlighting. Human capital, don't try to read this. Just know that it's an excerpt from the JP5. And the main point here is that the services are supporting human capital objectives. So if you have things related to talent acquisition, to background investigations, career and leadership development, it might fit really well into this human capital area. And if we take a look at the zoomed in differences on their scorecard, big list of ISO certifications under this one. So they do have CMMC level 2 or higher. They do have CMMI level 2 or higher, but then they also have the business continuity cert, the knowledge management system cert, the human resources management cert, and those are ways to earn additional credits. Now, something to keep in mind about this other certifications row is that it's not it's a 1-to-1. So if you have 2 certifications, you get 2 points, but the max number you can get is 2. So this is not an area where if you have 5 of these things listed, you're going to get 5 credits. No matter what combination you use, you're only going to get 2 credits for it. So just keep that in mind as you're doing your self-scores. Marketing and public relations, as it implies, this is marketing and public relations services that span advertising, marketing, production, and media services. There's a lot of really specific media things called out on this teeny tiny list of bulleted services. And this scorecard is actually a little bit simpler. It does not have CMMI. It does not have CMMC. It does have ISO 9001 and ISO 22301. So kind of an interesting departure there in terms of what's available. And like I said at the beginning, I don't know if the lack of CMMI and CMMC in particular, I don't know if that was intentional or if it was an oversight. We'll have to kind of see the final. Now, one interesting thing about the JP1 that GSA, the draft JP1 that GSA released, is that there is a difference between the scorecard on the marketing and PR small business set aside, which is what the SBSE is, and the unrestricted. So if you look at the unrestricted tab, there's an additional credit available under integrated experience for performance that spanned an integrated campaign across 3 or more media channels. And then if you scroll down to the bottom of the score sheet, it includes this extra text that defines what an integrated campaign would qualify as. So you get some pretty good examples there. So they give you, like, the count is by media type, not by platform. So, you know, Facebook and Instagram, if you did a campaign on each one of those, that wouldn't count as 2 separate things. That would be one. So be sure to pay attention to that little nuance if you're pursuing the marketing PR in the unrestricted domain. Okay, social services, back to some domain definitions here. This would be government services provided for the benefit of community and society, could include education, medical care, housing services, those kind of things. But the aim is to create more effective organizations, build stronger communities, and promote equity, if I could speak. Promote equality and opportunity. We will see if there are any modifications to that language just based on things that have happened in 2025 and what's considered an okay focus and what isn't. So I do expect that this list of services will probably be pretty consistent. We just might see some tweaking of the language leading up to it around equality and opportunity, and that's all I have to say about that. Okay, so nuances in the scorecard. Again, providing services that involve 5 or more licensed certified professionals. This is not something that appears in every scorecard. It is unique to social services. And then no CMMC here either, but they do have credit opportunities, credit potential, I guess is what I should call it, for Commission on Accreditation of Rehabilitation Facilities or Council on Accreditation, so COA. Okay, and then we have business administration. So assistance with administrative, clerical, and business management services. Again, probably going to be really interesting to see the difference between management and advisory and business administration as an example, because a lot of these types of services previously could have been relevant, could have been defended as relevant to the management and advisory domain. So I do think they're going to give us a little bit more guidance on that. But if they don't, you know how to self-assess. Okay, and then notes of the scorecard here. So a couple different ISO options, CMMI level 2, CMMC level 2. One thing I will mention, I did not include all the screenshots because we only have an hour together today, but you might need to, well, I would absolutely encourage you, if you are pursuing any of the unrestricted domains, some of them require that it's CMMI level 3 or higher. And so just make sure you pay attention to the level, because it's not just automatically level 2. There are some that have the higher level that is required. Okay, a couple notes about the self-scoring process. So when I'm talking to people and orienting them to OASIS Plus, the way to think about this is kind of a 2-part process. Phase 1 is you're going to get all of your documentation together outside of the portal. You're going to save all your documents, you're going to go through, you're going to mark it up, you're going to look at each project at the project level and say, okay, does this meet all 5 criteria for a qualifying project? What's my start date? What's my end date? What's my value? You're going to do all that kind of calculation. You're going to get all your documents prepped and do your self-assessment. And then phase 2 is where you have to upload and add your documents to the proposal and tag them correctly and organize them correctly in the submission portal to actually make all of those credits that you self-assessed come to life, right? So it's not just attaching everything, putting it in a zip file and sending it off to the contracting officer to sort through. You have to actually go into the portal and tell the portal, hey, Symphony, in this document, I want you to look for this tag, and this is where my evidence of integrated experience lives. So you have to show the system where to find the points that you are claiming. And that part can take longer than what you might expect. So there's absolutely a lot of like legwork to do in just gathering the documentation and getting it analyzed and organized and tagged and ready for upload. But I want to mention this early. Do not take for granted how meticulous, excuse me, you need to be when you actually go to do the upload and submission. That is something that we encourage carving out dedicated time over the course of a few days for, and having definitely some fresh eyes go in and review before you hit submit. Some other things to keep in mind with relevant and non-relevant projects under these scorecards. So the lion's share of the points on OASIS Plus come from your experience, right? These qualifying projects, the idea of past performance under OASIS Plus, just as a quick reframe, qualifying projects or qualifying experience is work that you've done that's similar in scope and relevance, right? There's recency requirements, things like that. So qualifying projects are the work itself. Past performance is how well you did that work. So those are two separate scoring areas. Qualifying projects and relevance definitely has more points than past performance, but we'll talk about that. So something to keep in mind here is that relevance matters most, but scale and complexity in your project portfolio are also critical. So relevance is in most domains going to get you the most amount of points. It's going to move your scorecard or bump your score the most. It'll have the biggest difference. But having a big project can also help outweigh deficiencies in relevance in certain cases. I will mention that in the intelligence services domain, this one's really interesting. Relevant projects in most domains are worth 4 credits a piece, right? So if you can say, hey, I have a project, it meets all 5 criteria of being a qualifying project, and it was relevant to management and advisory, you get 4 credits for that. If you had something similar in the intelligence services domain, relevance only gets you 2 credits. So you do have to pay attention to some of the scorecard nuances. And that's why if you're doing an eligibility check with us, or if we're running through your self-scoring validation, it's not just a rinse and repeat. So if we hear that you're going to go after 2 similar domains like T&E and M&A, the scorecards are pretty similar for that. But if we hear you're doing like facilities, logistics, intelligence, and R&D, all of those scorecards are very different from one another. So just because you achieve a score, let's say of 38 in one domain, does not mean that you're going to get a 38 in every domain, even if you can show that one project is relevant to both domains. There's still different scoring criteria that can end up, or that can cause you to end up with a different score. So I just mentioned that as a little bit of a be forewarned and forearmed that a score in one domain does not equal automatically that same score in another domain. And then something else to keep in mind, so I know I'm wandering a little bit, but bringing it back to these relevant and non-relevant projects, only your relevant qualifying projects are even eligible for past performance points. So you could have a scorecard, because again, you can use any combination of projects and points that you need to get to the qualifying criteria, that minimum qualifying threshold. But if you used, for example, 4 projects, if you're bidding on the management advisory domain, and you have 4 projects that are relevant to M&A, and you have 1 project that's not relevant, but let's say it hits a lot of the scoring criteria, like it was really big, so you get some points for scale, and you got a lot of cleared staff, so you get some points for that, and maybe it was for a different federal customer, so you're actually going to use it down in the federal experience project too. That's fine. You are permitted to do that, and you will get some points for that project. But when they go to evaluate your past performance credits, that one won't be counted. So it'd only be the 4 management and advisory relevant projects that would be eligible for any past performance credits. And quick spoiler on that one, it's not a 1-to-1 point system in past performance. In order to get 1 credit for positive past performance, you have to have 3 projects that have a positive rating. So 3 positive ratings get you 1 credit, 4 positive ratings get you 2 credits, 5 positive ratings get you 3 credits, and that's where you max out. So again, just because you have positive performance across 5 projects doesn't mean you're going to get 5 credits. You're going to max out at 3, assuming GSA accepts that your documentation that each project is relevant to the domain that you're applying it to. Okay, something else to keep in mind with domain alignment. I mentioned this earlier. And I'm sorry if you're just brand new to OASIS Plus, this is probably like drinking from a fire hose, but we have a whole library of other orientation things that you can dial into. And we are going to be doing another deep dive once we get Amendment 8. So don't panic just yet. But picking back up with domain alignment, this is something that came up a lot on the first round, is what I'll call it the first round. If you have a project that, maybe you did a couple different kinds of services and you want to be able to say, I think that this project is relevant to both the M&A domain and the technical and engineering domain, you're allowed to use one project and have it be relevant to two domains. There's some additional paperwork that you have to do. And what we just want to encourage people to do is make sure it passes the sniff test, right? So an example of this is you have a minimum average annual value, right, that we talked about for each domain. And for T&E and for M&A, we'll pick these two easy ones, it's $500,000. So of the work that you did, at least $500,000 of it in a given year had to be relevant to M&A services. If you wanted to also claim that for T&E, you'd have to show that at least $500,000 of the work was also relevant to T&E. Where we see folks get into trouble is if your average annual, if your average annual value was only $650,000. It's, I think, really hard to convince somebody that of a $650,000 project, $500,000 of it was relevant to M&A, while simultaneously $500,000 of it was equal or was relevant to T&E. That math just doesn't quite math. Now, if you can get a client to sign off on the project verification form, where you will have to list every relevance that you're claiming, right? So every domain that you're trying to show relevance to, and you have to give them a dollar value and say the dollar value relevant to this was, estimated to be this. You can use estimate amounts, but do you think when you go to your client, they're going to say, well, hold on, if your average annual value was $625K, how do you get $500,000 of relevance to two separate things? It's not impossible, but it really depends on your client. So we tend to encourage our folks to keep things easily defensible, because that's kind of the name of the game with OASIS Plus is you don't have to put forward the project that best exhibits all of your company's capabilities. You need to put forward a project that's going to score well and be easy to defend. And sometimes those two projects may not be the same thing. Ideally they are, but sometimes they're not with the scorecard evaluation. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so just again, the takeaway there is think through, does this pass the sniff test, and how many hats can one project really wear? And we're not talking about integrated experience credits where you just need to say like, all right, this was primarily management and advisory in nature, but it had a T&E element, and it also had a logistics element, and maybe it also had a facilities element. Those things would get you an additional credit. That's different than saying, yes, the heart of this work, what we were doing was really core to two different domains. With the federal customers, don't forget this is an area where you can add additional projects. So you're not beholden to only submitting 5 projects. You could actually use a teammates projects for the federal prime work as well. So sometimes people forget and they try to find one project that does all the unicorn things. And if you are a medium-sized business, you might have a portfolio that supports that. If you're a small business and you're using this as kind of your big strategic vehicle, you just might not be in that position yet. And that's okay, because there's ways to recoup those credits that don't involve kind of your core group of projects. So the thing to keep in mind there is that there are different minimum annual values as well, and different criteria. And then with the self-scoring process, I kind of mentioned this already, but this is all about what you can prove. Usually I have my meme in here from A Few Good Men where like, it doesn't matter what I believe, it only matters what I can prove. And that is absolutely true with these scorecard proposals, because you're not submitting a narrative. You're not giving them a 5-page management volume that says, and hey, by the way, we went into all this detail and we have all these capabilities, and so we do this better than anybody else. There's no qualitative assessment there. They're going to be looking at your statement of work and at your project verification form, where you might have 500 words to explain why the project you're submitting that's called Systems Engineering Services relates to M&A. Let's just use that as an example, right? So you get a little bit of text to try and support your alignment, but you won't be in the room with the evaluator. So whatever you say has to kind of stand on its own based on the proof that you submit with your documents. We spend a lot of our time with our clients just reviewing that and saying, okay, if I'm coming into this and I don't know anything about your background and I don't know anything about how hard you worked on this and how much you want this to look like the thing you're claiming, do I believe you? based on the documents you've given me, do I come to the same conclusion that yes, there's relevance here that is substantiated? Okay, areas to watch. I do like this quote from Modern Family. Some things to pay really close attention to. So if you were part of the first rodeo, right, phase one, you will know that there was such a thing as automatic relevance based on the NICS code or the PSC code of the project. I have not seen a list of what NICS codes are going to be considered automatically relevant to the business administration domain or to the human capital services domain, right? We don't have that list yet. What's nice about having automatic relevance is that it can reduce your burden of proof. So if you have an FPDS record and it has that magic NICS code or that magic PSC code, in many cases, you don't have to go further. A couple caveats there. The other thing to keep in mind is if it is automatically relevant to one of the domains, that also does not mean that you have to align it to that domain. There are plenty of situations that we saw on the first round where, the contract was coded as one thing, but that's just because of what the master IDIQ NICS code was, or it was just what the contracting officer selected. So whatever the NICS code is, the takeaway here is that it doesn't guarantee that you will or won't be determined to have relevance to the domain that falls under. And so what I put here is that you really need to watch out for the task orders. If the NICS was issued under a multiple award IDIQ where multiple NICS codes are allowable at the order level. So for example, if your task order has a NICS code solely because that's what the NICS code of the IDIQ is, that's not going to count as automatic relevance. So I think they have some examples in the solicitation. So that's how OASIS regular pre-OASIS Plus, the actual OASIS contract, that's something that applied there, right? So if you had an OASIS task order that you were using as a qualifying project, you couldn't say, and look, it's automatically relevant because it has this NICS code. You had to go one step further, and they have a very detailed list in the RFP of additional information that you need. So basically, you have to still submit a tagged SOW or PWS or get a project verification form signed. So anyway, the bottom line here is we just don't know what's going to be automatically relevant to these new domains. Not seen that published yet. We already talked about this a little bit, but that delineation between the management and advisory and business admin and human capital and financial services, and I didn't put it on here, but even marketing and PR, right? Like the lines could be blurred, and you might be able to use that to your advantage if you want to secure multiple domains. Or it might be something that we come out and we get, whether we wanted it or not, really clear definitions for each domain, and that might close some of the doors. So we'll just have to see what Amendment 8 says. And by the way, that information is likely to be in one of the 12 attachments that are going to come out with this thing. So don't just read the solicitation, the RFP itself, and think that you're going to have this comprehensive understanding. This is one of those solicitations where you have to get into every single attachment and make sure you understand what's being asked. Okay, the date for recency determination, project eligibility. We talked about this on that, 5 criteria of a qualifying project. Previously, this was a date that shifted back and forth. And with Q&A, they said, no, it should be the date of proposal submission. No, it should be the date of proposal release. We're just going to have to wait and see what they do around that language so that you can determine, do I have 6 months of performance? And is this within the last 5 years? So I think those dates are both going to get updated so that you can measure adequately. This is just as something to keep in mind as you're trying to determine your project scale and if you're eligible for additional credits. If you're doing it based off of dollar value, that's a pretty straightforward calculation. I already mentioned they take the days of the period of performance divided by 366, and your total contract value, and that's how you end up with your average annual value. If you're trying to claim credit for scale because you had like 12 FTEs or more than 15 FTEs, you should just know that the definition of an FTE as it relates to the OASIS Plus solicitation is 1,912 hours. It's not 1880, it's not 1920, it's 1912, or at least it was with Amendment 7. So that's something to watch. It's a number that they give you so you can still do the math and still have confidence in it, but make sure you use the number that OASIS or that GSA gives you. And then with Symphony, I'll talk about this in the next steps, but please, please, please register a few more people in your company to have access than what you think you will need. Just as a an anecdote for you, we supported a number of companies with their Polaris submissions, right? If you remember that multiple award, that GWAC from years and years ago. And they are still releasing modifications and amendments and have not fully done the awards yet. And, I was counting it up the other day. And in many cases, I am the only remaining point of continuity. Might be one other person who has access and, they've since departed the company. But in some cases, like that will be the only channel that the communication comes through is via Symphony. And then you get an email, or the people who you designate as your reps will get the email. And it's been historically very difficult to get more people added to Symphony once the solicitation closes. I don't know if that's going to get easier now that we're going to this rolling submission thing where, it's continuously open. But there's no harm in giving more people access and what you think we'll need. That is not the same thing as saying everybody's permitted to do things in Symphony, right? Like you should not have a lot of people doing uploads and trying to do the tagging. That should be a very small, very clearly designated group of individuals. But it's a good thing if other people can log on, see your company library, see your project library, add, remove documents later down the road if they need to. So just don't get stuck on that. Well, in 6 months' time, we're definitely going to know if this is or isn't to go. Like you might want to plan for 12 months out and say, okay, what are the odds that all of these people are still going to be here in perpetuity forever and ever? Please don't take that the wrong way. Like I said, I can count. There's at least 9 proposal managers who have come and gone with the companies that I supported on Polaris. And like I said, I'm the point of continuity for some of those people now. So I don't mind doing that, but it's a better solution if you have people who are internal to your company with access to your proposal. So you're not jumping through hoops at the last minute, just trying to get people to log in and see what's there. Okay, real quick. I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible because this is another area where teams get into a little bit of trouble. The previous guidance around using projects more than once is you can do it, but there are some restrictions. So the bottom line is you cannot use a project more than once in the same domain and solicitation. So the solicitation is what corresponds to the kind of IDIQ that it is, right? The unrestricted, the small business, the woman-owned small business, that's the solicitation. The domain is the kind of service that's being provided. So T&E, M&A, R&D. So if you have, let's just say you have this amazing project that you're so proud of, and you want to use it as a qualifying project or as a federal experience project, we'll just call it project number 1. If you are submitting to the small business solicitation and you're also a hub zone and it's relevant to the T&E domain, you can use that project in both the small business solicitation T&E domain and the hub zone solicitation T&E domain. That's permitted. You can use that project more than once where you are the prime. If you are teaming with somebody else and you only want to prime in the hub zone solicitation and they want to prime in the small business solicitation because they're not a hub zone, but they want to use your project because it scores so many points, you can do that. You can give them that project to use and still use it yourself because you are in the hub zone solicitation and they are in the small business solicitation. So even though it's the same domain, because it's different IDIQs, that's permitted. What you cannot do is use it in your own prime bid on the small business solicitation T&E domain and give it to them to use in their small business T&E domain proposal. If it appears in 2 IDIQs and 2 domains that are the same, it will be excluded from both proposals. So you'll both take a hit and potentially be disqualified if you do that. So keep track of who you give your projects to and what they're using it for and how they're aligning it. So one of the things that we recommended during the phase 1 submission was having that in that letter of commitment in your teaming letter, basically that you submit, just stating in there, like, I am giving this company permission to use this project under this contract number for their bid on this IDIQ in this domain. And it's not because that part is legally binding. It's because if you're farming your projects out, it really needs to be crystal clear what is being aligned where. And so that it's a checksum, right? It's a way of, if your prime reads it and they go, oh, wait, that's right, we were only supposed to use this for the T&E domain, they can at least consult with you and see if there's any flexibility if they plan to realign it. Because things happen with the solicitation, amendments come out and what what domain originally looks really good might shift over time just based on the projects that actually come together and what the documentation actually says. So we just encourage you to get it in writing so that everybody's on the same page about what they can and can't do with your project. Something that came up during the Q&A with the RFI was whether you would be permitted to, let's say you submitted and you won a small business IDIQ in the M&A domain. Could you use the projects that you qualified for that domain to bid on another team as part of this phase 2? Indications from the Q&A were that that would be permitted. So this idea of like not being on the same solicitation and the same IDIQ, there might be a little bit of lenience there if you're not both bidding at the same time, but I don't know what that's going to look like totally in Amendment 8. So again, it's an area to watch, something to keep an eye out for, and definitely stay away from any any restrictions around that duplication. Okay, and then we have our meme here again. Other areas to watch, the OTA documentation. This is something that, I told you they went back and forth as to whether or not to even allow OTAs, but it's even a little bit more complicated than that because you really need to look at what your FPDS record says if you have an OTA award, because sometimes the contract, or it's not a contract, the agreement is issued to the consortium, and sometimes it is issued to the company. If your FPDS record shows your OTA as being issued to the consortium, you cannot claim that as federal prime experience, at least based on Amendment 7. This is something that's kind of a disadvantage for the small businesses and the non-traditional contractors, because that's the benefit of the consortium, right? Is that you join the consortium, they kind of help you front the admin and do that portion of the contract while you actually do the work. So you could submit when they open up for Q&A, or actually Q&A are open now around the score sheet. But when the full Q&A opens, if you feel strongly about that, I do encourage you to submit questions and show GSA your rationale for why your work under an OTA, even if the OTA was not awarded directly to you, why you should still get credit as a prime. Just know that in the previous bid, if you aren't listed on FPDS, it doesn't matter if you're on the performer agreement. They go with what FPDS says. So I just want you to know about that from the get-go. Teaming limitations. So if you're in one of the set-aside categories, so if you're bidding on service disabled veteran owned, if you're doing hub zone, and especially if you're doing like a mentor protege situation in any of the small business set-asides, keep an eye out for minimum project contributions, right? Where it might say, hey, the protege still, no matter what, needs to submit 1 or 2 projects. Like, of the 5 that you submit, X number need to come from this type of party. So keep an eye out for that. And then as it relates to business size, in theory, you can team with small businesses or large businesses. So if you're a small business pursuing a small business IDIQ in the M&A domain, what you need to understand is that whoever you team with, you're only going to receive the CLINs, which correspond to NICS codes, in that domain where everybody on your team is considered a small business. So if you're a small business in every single one of those NICS codes and you have a teammate who's only a small business in 5 of the 10, for example, you're not going to get all 10. You're only going to get the 5 where everybody is considered a small business. So it's really important before you decide to add somebody to your team at the IDIQ level that you pull up their SAMs, see how they're representing, and make sure that it's true and updated so that you don't get excluded from having certain CLINs listed on your IDIQ when it gets awarded. Okay, so that was important. Just because things happened in 2025 and there were a lot of terminated projects, keep an eye out around those minimum performance duration requirements. It would not surprise me if they had specific language related to that. I'm sure there will be Q&A around that. So if the project is terminated, but you had 6 months of performance, can you use it? If the project was terminated, you had 4 months of performance, but it's over now. Can you use it? I think we're going to see some guidance around that. The completed versus ongoing projects, we already talked about this a little bit, right? Where if the project is done, if the history is passed and the book is closed, you only get credit for what was actually obligated. If it's ongoing, then you can use that total contract value, the ceiling value, basically, in FPDS as your larger number, which makes sense if you're doing division, right? Sorry, one other note on the teaming limitations, just because this always comes up in the questions. You are permitted to add teammates after awards. So just because you have somebody on your IDIQ team doesn't mean that you're beholden to using them for the task order bids that follow. You can change your team. So really the point in building a team for this proposal submission to get the IDIQ is to get to that minimum qualifying threshold. But again, there's no obligation for you to team with them on every subsequent task order or anything. Okay, and then last other area to watch in this category, don't trust Symphony to catch your gaps. There's a number of things where, you know, it's going to feel like, oh my gosh, I've already told you this so many times, Symphony, or oh my gosh, I marked up my documents and I put them in here. Like, what else do I need to do for you? Symphony is not smart. And I don't mean that it's not a good system. I just mean that it's not going to know if what you're telling it is correct. So for example, it's not going to know if the JP3, the project verification form, or whatever JP it ends up being, if you upload that, it's going to see a document there and it's going to say, I understand that you have told me to look in this form for your evidence, but it's not going to know if that form is signed or not. And it only counts if it's a signed form. So there's a limitation in terms of what you can expect Symphony to keep you honest on. And this is why we encourage working with fresh eyes, having a couple more people have access to your system than what you might think is necessary, because it's really easy to overlook something like that and end up, you know, compromising an entire qualifying project over a missing signature or something like that. It's also not going to know if you uploaded the correct file, right? So it might give you an error and say, hey, some form of document is required, or you haven't told me where to look for this, and you might get a little error when you go to submit, but it's not going to know if you uploaded the CPARs from 2 years ago versus the most recent CPARs. It's just not that smart. So there is still a lot of legwork to be done. Okay, I know we're getting really close on time. So advice on what to do next. Make sure you read the current RFP. This is Amendment 7, and then everything that comes out with Amendment 8. You got to go through it. Like I said, we will do another webinar. We'll try to help you out as much as possible. But somebody finds a loophole every time. And I love it. It's great. It's a great brain teaser. But make sure that you're looking at the latest guidance and that you've looked at all of the attachments. Updating your records and registering the submission portal. You should be able to register for Symphony now. If not, it'll be open soon. I see the question in the chat. Yes, we will be sending the recording and the deck to everybody who's attending today or anybody who registered. So don't worry about that. Just one quick, oh, by the way, Symphony will pull your data from sam.gov. So if you are due for your annual refresher, if there's anything that needs to change, great. We got confirmation Symphony is open. Thank you. Make sure you start in sam.gov and do your refresh and your verification there, so that when it pulls from Symphony, we're not then waiting on a refresh in SAM to replicate in Symphony, kind of do things in the right order. Doing an eligibility check. We have a really basic download that you can use. We also have a free project tracker that you can download from our website. And the idea there is to just get your projects documented. We'll talk more about this in a minute. But don't skip over this step. Don't just assume that because you got an award last time that you're going to be able to qualify this time. There can be gotchas that are lurking there. And so we can help you if you need help with that validation. It's also going to take a lot more than a week to put your proposal together. So even though it's really binary, just know that there's more legwork required. Okay, gathering your documentation. I told you this previously. It's all about what you can prove, right? So pull down your FPDS record. Go find the actual contract statement of work or the contract PWS, not the one from the solicitation. See what's in execution today. If you have mods, make sure you have signed versions of the mods. Just gather all of this stuff now and start organizing it by project so that you can see what you need to go hunt down, what you've already got, what needs to be updated. The number of times that we've had people send us documentation, we're like, hey, it was only signed by one party. Like that happens all of the time. So this is a really great time, especially while, we have all this free time around the holidays, right? To get that documentation in order. The other thing we encourage you to do is talk to your customers, just especially given the shakeups in 2025. Make sure that your project managers, on the client side, make sure they're still accessible. Or if they've been replaced, do you have the contact information for the new person? Are they familiar with the work that you do? Would they be willing to sign for you? Just having the kind of greasing the skids and having a conversation that like, hey, we plan on bidding on OASIS Plus. We're probably going to use this project. There might be some things for you to sign. I just wanted to give you a heads up. That's a really considerate thing for you to do. Just to let them know that there's more coming. And then thinking through your teaming strategy. I touched on this lightly, mostly for your small business bidders, right? So don't just think about, okay, we have to qualify, we have to get this. Like, think through how you're going to use this contract and delivery. I've said this multiple times. OASIS Plus is not an IT services contract. That is not what this is designed for. This is professional services. So does that mean that it has no utility for you whatsoever? No. Does it mean that you might not see as much work get awarded to this as what you might like? Yeah, probably. So just think through, like, what are you going to use this for? And then who do you want to team with? Who's going to complement your capabilities? Who do you trust? Who do you want to maybe bid with, even though you don't have to? Wouldn't it be easier if you just picked a company that you know you like doing business with and who complements your skills in the areas where you want to deliver? Seems like good homework to do. Okay, we do have, I mentioned this, a sample project tracker. It's simple, but it is useful, and it is free, so you can download that. But basically, we want you to write down, like, what are you going to call this project? What's the contract number? Do you know it? Was it prime experience? Was it federal experience? Who was the customer? You need to look at the funding agency ID, that 4-digit code that's an FPDS. Were you the prime? If not, who was the prime? Because that's who's going to have to sign your project verification form. What was the start date? What was the end date? Are you in negotiations for extending that end date? What's actually on the documentation today? So just going through the homework of gathering all this documentation is going to serve you really well as we get the finalized criteria, because you're going to know what's going to score for what, and how things are going to be listed. So we'll have the link for that for you. And then we actually have a whole hub of information. This is where you can go. You can find our blog on OASIS Plus Phase 2. We're going to be keeping that up to date as we get more information from GSA. You can find our downloads. And if you want to engage us for services, there's going to be information on that page as well. We tend to do 3 different tiers of services. We can help you out with just an eligibility check. If you need a little bit more help through the process and you need, like, compliance on steroids, and oh, by the way, you want an on-call advisor, we have a coach and review option. If you just need to outsource all of it to us and have it be done for you, we can do that as well. So once we see Amendment 8 published, I think we're going to have some more finalized options there. But our eligibility check is available for purchase now. And that's something where if you go to our website, especially if you're only looking at 2 domains or less, we can get you on the books and help you out with that. And with that, you're going to get a really detailed report about how we scored each of your projects, where they align. We're not just looking at the score sheet that you do for yourself. We're going to actually look at your project documentation, make you go through the exercise of gathering it all, reviewing it with the same eye that GSA would take, and saying, yes, it would qualify for this, or no, it wouldn't. Here's what we think your best case score would be. Here's what you can do to improve it. So you get the recommendations, you get the strategy, you get a session with one of our advisors, so that you can have full confidence in your bid. And by the way, if you purchase one of our eligibility checks, we credit the cost of that towards one of our higher tier packages. So that was something that a lot of clients really liked last time, because no matter what, you need to know that you're eligible to bid on this. There's no reason to submit a bid if you're not going to meet the minimum qualifying score. So don't spend the next month toiling, if you're not going to be able to get there on your own as a prime contractor. So we can help out with all of that. I know we are over time. I apologize, but I'm happy to stay on in case you guys have any questions that you want. I saw a couple in the chat. I'm going to try to get to those next. And then just another thing you can mark your calendars for. So if you need to take a little brain break from OASIS Plus, we have an upcoming webinar all about government contracting trade shows, and how to really maximize your return on investment in those. So if you've ever gone to, I don't know, an FCA West or a Gold Coast and walked away going, did I get my money's worth out of that? Or boy, that was really intense and I'm not sure what to do next. This is the webinar for you to dial into. Okay. So I'm going to pop over to the Q&A and to the chat. If you can hang on, great. If you need to drop, totally understand.